Welcome to the HawkCast with your host, AJ Hawk.
Mike McCartney, my agent for my whole time in the NFL. Met you a long time ago, but I think, Mike, you're a little more high profile right now over these last couple months. Why do you think that is? Who's your big time client you just signed a gigantic contract with, changing the game?
Yeah, Kirk Cousins. It's a quarterback, and quarterbacks, at least when they're at the top of their game and they're under the age of 30, don't hit the open market. So it was an interesting process, and really goes back a couple of years. But a lot of, somebody asked me yesterday if it was fun, and I went through exactly what happened on those first 2 days of free agency, and they said, okay, fun's not the right word, but very rewarding for sure. It was a really interesting process.
So, we're going to get into the details for sure, because obviously you and me assume everybody knows everything that goes on when it comes to contracts in the NFL, and Kirk signing this fully guaranteed contract it's basically a game-breaking, game-changing situation of what you guys did. But going back to 2015, I think I've seen where you talked about where you kind of planted the seed in Kirk's mind that you guys could potentially change the way people do contracts. What does that mean?
Well, traditionally, when a quarterback, especially a quarterback, does a long-term deal, they end up doing a 5-year deal, and the first 2 years are typically fully guaranteed, where there's no scenario where the player is not going to receive the money. Beginning with year 3, depending on the structure of the contract, and there's all different ways you can do that, a player starts to become a little bit vulnerable. Certainly in the last couple of years, they become really a couple 1-year options for the team. And so, we've never seen a fully guaranteed contract. Furthermore, when teams guarantee dollars, whether it's in the form of a signing bonus or the base salary, they want years added to the contract. So when Kirk finished the 2015 season, he was finishing his rookie contract. It was his first year starting, the first 7 games, probably up and down. And then the last 9 games, he just took off. And the Redskins weren't really ready to sort of get married at that point. And ultimately, they made a few offers, and the best one would have paid out $32 million over 2. Now, that sounds like a lot of money. Yet, had we done nothing and just allowed Kirk to get the franchise tag, which is what happened, he could play on a 1-year deal at roughly $20 million. Well, when I sat down with the Redskins at the Senior Bowl, I said, whenever I look at the franchise tag, I don't look at it as a 1-year window. I look at it as a 2-year window. In other words, if Kirk is 27, he's only started 1 year at this point. Knowing his work ethic, knowing his character, his integrity, he's only going to get better. And you're going to franchise him a year from now. So I'm looking at this as a 2-year, $44 million proposal. Well, again, their best offer was 32 over 2. So it doesn't take a great agent at that point to say, 44 over 2 is certainly financially better than 32 over 2. Where it gets tricky for a player and an agent is just, what can the player stomach? Because it's hard to go through a 1-year deal, especially at that position. So Kirk and I had a lot of discussions. What did we feel comfortable countering on a long-term deal? And really during the season, I'd kind of planted that seed about a 3-year fully guaranteed contract, and he got excited about that. And I explained to him the ramifications of what that would look like going forward. And he was strong, and he said, you know what, that would be something that would be really good. So we floated it out to the Redskins on the last day before the franchise tag was given to us, and they didn't really appreciate it. So
wait, is this the first time he got tagged? You floated that?
Yeah. So I met with them at the combine, and they made their offer and basically said, hey, can you give us a counter offer? And so at the combine, I go home on Saturday morning when the workouts start. So I flew home, called them during the afternoon, and I called the cap guy, Eric Schaefer, really good guy, and we always have had really good conversations, even to this day. So I called him, and he was in the workout with the rest of the Redskins brass. And I said, hey, we're prepared to make you an offer. And so, of course, we had to do it verbally. And I said, I'll do a 3-year deal at 19 and a half. And I said, Eric, the way to look at this is, I get that the structure will be tough because it's never been done before. But if you think about it, if you pay 44 the next two, and I'm offering 58.5 for three, that's 14.5 million for year three. That's going to be the cheapest starting quarterback by far. Mm-hmm. So, and they didn't want anything to do with that. So I felt like there was a little bit of or enough of a win-win with that offer.
Why would they not be comfortable with that? Just because it was fully guaranteed and no one had done that up to that point?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. Anytime you make an offer where there's a lot of guaranteed dollars involved, then teams want years attached to it. So I think 58.5, I'd have to go back and look at my notes. I'm pretty sure that would have been the largest guarantee at that time to begin with. And I understood. I said to the Redskins before we even made this offer, I said, look, I understand putting myself in your shoes. Kirk's done it 1 year. Defensive coordinators have not prepared for him in the offseason. Teams get comfortable when a guy does it a second time. I can remember when Tony Romo sort of came out of nowhere with the Cowboys. I want to say he came off the bench in September, had a really good year. The Cowboys waited until he did it a second time. So teams do feel a lot more comfortable. And I had expressed to them, I understand if you guys aren't ready to get married. Now, you've seen Kirk practice for 4 years. You've seen him prepare. You saw the changes when he took over the team as opposed to when the previous quarterback was there. So I think there's a lot of things you can feel really good about. But if you're not ready to commit long term, then let's just play on the 1 year franchise tag.
Wow, there's a lot to go over there. I always wonder too. I know it's a team by team basis, but is the head coach involved in any of this? Does the head coach have a guy? So that was Jay Gruden at the Redskins. When you tend to work with teams, are some guys super involved? Some guys have no say. How's that work?
Yeah, I don't think head coaches are really that involved. I'm trying to think.
But can't they go to their GM or their owner and take a stand for a guy if they really want them?
Well, absolutely. I wouldn't necessarily see that. I haven't had many head coaches through the years call me back channeling that. So I wouldn't know necessarily. You definitely can get a vibe if the head coach is behind a player. And I certainly think Jay wanted Kirk back at that moment. The Redskins, it's really Bruce Allen is the team president, and he makes the bulk of the decisions. Scott McCloughan was the general manager at the time. I go way back with Scott. I used to put together a softball team when I was coaching at the University of Colorado, of all Colorado Buff football players. And his brother, Dave McCloughan, was on the team. And when Scott was a senior in high school, he used to play on our team. So I've known Scott forever. So, I think in the media, the negotiation took a kind of a negative tone. It really wasn't negative when we were just talking, whether it was me with Scott McCloughan or Eric Schaefer, even Bruce Allen. We never had words. We never yelled at each other. Nothing of that sort. Kirk is such a classy guy, and I would never want to represent a player in that regard, or in that manner, I should say.
Wasn't McCloughan the guy that Kirk did the whole "you like that" deal too, coming off the field?
Yeah, that was the next year. That was in 15. Yeah, that was when they beat Tampa. They were down a couple scores, and in the second quarter, and it looked bleak. And he got booed off the field coming off at halftime. And then from that second half on, I mean, his numbers are pretty historic when you put them together. And so that was with the media actually just headed to the locker room right after the game. And where he said, you like that to a media guy. The following year is when he kind of rubbed the head of Scott McCloughan.
Okay.
And, had that moment that was captured on camera.
He and McCloughan had to have somewhat of a good relationship to feel comfortable to do that, doesn't he?
Yeah, definitely. Scott's a great guy. Scott's for the players. He's very people-oriented. And I know that he and Kirk had many conversations, and that's easy for me to see that they would, get along very well.
Okay, so he gets franchise tagged. The tag too is something else. So when I do a lot of radio for SiriusXM, people don't understand what the franchise, how many are there? Franchise, transitional tag, and
that's
what?
it.
That's it, right?
It's just so when a player's contract ends, however long he's been in the league, if the team doesn't want to lose him, they have two options to make sure that they at least can keep the player. And it goes back to when the CBA came in 1993, when it first started. The CBA is the collectively bargained agreement between the players and the owners that set the rules between, how contracts are going to look. And so in 1993, Pat Bowlen was the owner of the Broncos. My understanding is he insisted on a franchise tag so that he would never lose John Elway. And the franchise tag, the computation is it takes the average of the top 5 salaries over a period of time at whatever position. And so a team can place the franchise tag, and there's actually 2 types of franchise tags. After the 15th season, we got the franchise tag where we could actually talk to teams. If a team had wanted, they could have signed Kirk to a contract, and had the Redskins would have given the Redskins a week to match. Had the Redskins matched, then whatever contract we had signed with that team would have then been with the Redskins. Had the Redskins not matched, then that team would have had to give 2 first-round picks to the Redskins. The second year, we got what is called the exclusive franchise tag, and we couldn't even talk to anybody else. Now, the other tag is the transition tag. The computation of that is the average of the top 10 players at a position, and that's simply a right of first refusal. So there was speculation after this season that the Redskins could transition tag Kirk. We would have then been able to go to the market, talk to anybody we wanted, actually signed a contract. They would have had a week to see if they wanted to match the contract or not. Had they not matched, there would have been no compensation involved. So that's the difference between the transition and the franchise, is compensation for a franchise player, unless it's an exclusive franchise tag.
Okay, I think a lot of that goes just over people's heads. There's so many moving parts. Basically, you get paid, if you're tagged, you get paid the average of the top 5, did you say?
Yeah.
So the first year Kirk got tagged, what was that?
That was the franchise tag, and that was $20 million.
20, and then did it go to 21 the next year, or did it bump?
So the second year, so a player can only get 3 franchise tags. The first one is whatever that number is, and that year it was $20 million. The second year, it's automatically a 20% bump. So 20 times 1.2 or 20% raise is $24 million. The third year, which was this off season, it would have been a 44% bump. So Kirk played for $20 million roughly after the 2015 season for 2016. In 17, he played for 24. The Redskins, when this season ended, had a decision. They could either let him go to the market, which is ultimately what they did because they traded for Alex Smith. They could transition him, which was a 20% bump off the previous salary. That would have been about $28.8 million. Or they could franchise him at $34.5 million on a 1-year deal. The moment the player signs the franchise or transition tag, it's fully guaranteed for the year. So 34.5 would have been
not a bad deal, but it's not that's not out of the realm of possibility for Washington to do that. If they wanted to keep him around for 1 more year, to pay him 34 that year, that's not crazy.
That was a lot of speculation that they were considering it. I didn't have those conversations with them, and they would have had their own internal discussions about that. But there was certainly a lot of media speculation, the last couple of years about this contract. And I'm sure they had those, conversations internally.
So what happened though when the team? So Kirk is still a member of that. He's still technically on the roster, and they trade for Alex Smith. How does that work?
Well, his contract officially ends the last day of the league year, which is the day before, or as we go into the next league year. March 14th of 2018, a couple weeks ago, was the start of this league year. So his contract didn't technically expire. Now there was a window where there's a 2-week window beginning in late February where a team can place the franchise tag or the transition tag on a player. That window expired, I want to say March 1st, March 3rd, somewhere in there. I can't remember the exact date. Maybe it was March 6th. So that's when we kind of knew for sure there was, without any hesitation, he was going to be a free agent.
And then the Redskins trade, they bring Alex Smith on, and But can't he technically, the trade not go through if something happens before the league year ends, or once the league year starts? Couldn't he technically not be a Redskin still somehow?
Yeah, there is. There are a couple scenarios. One, the two teams have a verbal agreement, and in this case, that was Super Bowl week, so that's a long time to keep this verbal.
Does verbal mean anything when it comes to, like, you can't, and no execs trust each other. No execs trust, like, you can't. I don't know. I just have a hard time. I feel like so many executives and guys running teams are so paranoid that they can't just trust someone's word.
Yeah, I think that they can, and I think that happens more than you would think. In fact, I think weren't there over 10 trades announced before the start of the league year? Every one of those were based on a verbal agreement. I think as we hit that free agent period, March 12th and 13th, we have this negotiation window. We had a lot of verbal agreements even between agents and clubs when a player agrees to a contract. What could derail a contract or a trade, an Alex Smith trade in this case, is the verbal agreement falls apart, or what if Alex goes to Washington, they see something on the physical they don't like, and they could then veto the trade at that point. So there are a couple scenarios where it can fall apart. Typically when it comes to a quarterback, a team's not going to let it fall apart.
No, they can't. And Alex got paid good money to come. Do you recall what his contract was?
Yeah, it was better than anything they ever offered us.
What was it?
It was, I think it was like $23 million a year, and I want to say 3 years were essentially guaranteed, which they never offered us a third-year guarantee. So, which is fine. I hope people know there are no hard feelings on our part. I mean, it's just business. At some point, you go through a negotiation and you try and keep it as positive as you can. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So if it doesn't work, you move on and, you kind of shake hands with the other side, and we're going to come to the table again with somebody else. So, but yeah, Alex Smith got a great deal. I want to say he had 71 guaranteed over in the first 3 years, but he did a typical quarterback deal where it's a 5-year deal.
Okay. Oh, all right. So those typical quarterback deals, though, like you said, after the first 2 or 3 years, the quarterback is pretty vulnerable. What does that mean exactly?
Okay, so when a team wants to move on from a player, or they want to release a player, they look at the current contract if there are years remaining. If there are guaranteed dollars left, then it won't make sense necessarily to cut a player. Say they owe a player $20 million and it's guaranteed, okay? But if there's maybe $1 million or $2 million left guarantee, or no guarantee left, then, we can get over technical here, but let's just keep it sort of simple. If there's no guaranteed dollars left, say they're in the third or the fourth or fifth year, then it's cheaper for the team to actually release the player and go sign someone else. We see that all the time at many, many positions. Most contracts, when it's all said and done, when you really get into sort of the nitty gritty, are 1 or 2 year deals followed by a series of team options where the team has the option to keep them. And if they decide not to keep the player and they release him, it's actually cheaper to cut him than to keep him. And so that's where players become vulnerable.
So that kind of works for both sides, though. The player wants as much guaranteed money up front as he can, and the team doesn't mind doing that if they front load it and then make these flashy numbers in the back end that they know they're probably never going to pay the guy because they'll cut him before those are due.
That happens all the time. We don't do that at Priority Sports because we just don't believe in that. Contracts should be about the player. And you and I have said this to each other. I mean, we've had these discussions as well as any player. We're trying to make sure that whatever the contract says, you get every penny. And it doesn't always happen that way, but that's the goal. And, how you structure it is so important. And that's where guaranteed dollars, whether it's in the form of a signing bonus or the base salary being guaranteed, is, as much as we can get guaranteed, we want to do it.
Now, you guys at Priority, obviously, I guess you have a little different way you go about it, which you don't care about really pumping these big-time numbers up that we know are not going to happen. It happened back in the day before, I think even more than it does now. These non-likely-to-be-earned incentives, like if Drew Bledsoe punts for over 60 yards, he gets an extra $12 million. Stupid stuff like that they used to write into contracts. I don't see it happening as much. But Do you see players wanting that? Do they want their contracts to look big, even if they know they're not going to be getting that money?
I've never had one player in 17 years as an agent ask for anything like that.
Well,
So I don't think,
you're recruiting different type guys, Mike. You must be.
yeah, no, I was going to say at Priority we really put a premium on high character guys that were team captains in college and want to do the right things. I certainly think there are some guys in the league that are probably overly concerned about the perception of their contract, and I'm fortunate. I've never had to face that personally. It's simply what's best for you, and I want to make sure that whatever numbers I'm telling you as a player, if you can get every dollar, that's what's important.
Now, what about a guy switching quickly to Richard Sherman? Now, he doesn't have an agent. He supposedly negotiated himself with the 49ers on his contract. I know there was a big breakdown, a couple of them on the internet, of what I guess the missteps that he may have had. What do you think of his deal and how he negotiated with the Niners directly?
Yeah, I think it'd be really difficult to negotiate your own deal. In this case, my understanding is Richard was at the NFLPA convention, or whatever you want to call it, seminar, and flew in from Vegas, met with the 49ers, and was talking to a couple other teams. The problem for him is, as he's negotiating with the 49ers, he really can't get a feel for what other teams think. He made a comment that the 49ers in their offer had some upsides, which I can explain. Those are dollars beyond the base salary that you can earn based on play time or performance. His comment was, a couple other teams said, hey, we're not going to get to those upsides. Go ahead and take the deal. Well, there is a psychology in a negotiation. And, I'm a firm believer that, I want every player, if he's going to consider a team, to walk into that building. And most of my guys actually take visits and meet with teams and meet with the head coach and meet with the coordinator and the position coach. Well, there is a psychology to that, because at that point, if a player, is impressive and, coaches say, hey, don't let that guy out of the building, So let's just take whatever team, supposedly Detroit was interested in. If I'm the agent of that player, I'm going to, while Richard is in the building talking to the 49ers and he's getting those coaches excited, it's sort of my job to make sure that the 49ers know that the Lions are excited, maybe another team or two. And if we don't get the contract that we want in San Francisco, we're going to definitely get on a plane and go visit Detroit. Well, at that point, while he's on a plane or even visiting with Detroit, I'm still talking to San Francisco, a third, a fourth, a fifth team. And so, he didn't have any of that. I also think, he made a comment that he read contracts for 10 or 12 hours. That's comical. We spend, a lot of time on contracts. As you know, my background is I used to be a scout on the team side, and I'd spend 10, 12, 14 hours a day watching tape. When I became an agent 17 years ago, I didn't have to watch tape for 10, 12 hours a day. So I started studying contracts and really got to a point where I could understand contracts. And it takes a whole lot more than 10 or 12 hours. So, we spend, 50, 60, 70 hours a week, and we debate, we talk through different things. And so I think where people are being critical of Richard is twofold. The structure's very, very team friendly. And then the attitude towards agents.
That? Can you say what that means, though, when it's team friendly? What does that mean to people?
Well, for example, he's coming off an injury, and he has a base, or he gets a signing bonus, I don't know, $2 or $3 million. He gets a base salary that's $2 or $3 million. I think it's $5 million total between the two. He gets another what we call roster bonus if he's on the roster and healthy at a later date. The biggest problem I think people had was twofold. Is he's got what we call a per game roster bonus. So for every game he dresses, he gets paid. That's really not a positive for a player. That's a way.
It's very high too. That's the thing. If that number is high, that's very bad for the player. I feel like
it's very bad for the player. It should be the player's money, and it's a way for the club to protect themselves if the player doesn't dress. And so the club will say to the player, hey, if you don't dress, we need that money to go ahead and sign another player. Well, they're not going to sign another player because you're still on the 53-man roster. Regardless, it was a $2 million roster bonus. We've only seen that one other time in the history of the NFL, and that was with the 49ers and Colin Kaepernick. $2 million is absurdly high. I think Jimmy Garoppolo, who they just signed to a massive deal, had maybe 750. As an agent, I don't think any competent agent would accept anything, $1 million and up, let alone $2 million. The second thing is if Richard goes to the Pro Bowl or he's named All Pro, it kicks in a full guarantee of his second and third years of his contract. And I want to say it's about $8.5 million a year. Well, if you're an All Pro corner, and you're on the open market, you're making a whole lot more than $8.5 million a year. And so, most agents would have preferred maybe avoided the contract or kicked in a higher paragraph 5 guarantee than, there would have been an escalator involved. So there's all kinds of ways to kind of get to that finish line that would protect both player and club. And I think, I'm not looking to be negative about Richard as much as, I just think as an agent, we go through this all the time. We talk to clubs, we know their style, we know how, they operate. And I think there are other ways to accomplish, what Richard may have wanted to accomplish, but he's never been through this before. And that was the second piece I think that bothered agents. The first piece being the actual structure, and the second piece, just the attitude like, hey, I could spend 10, 12 hours figure this out and I'll do a better job than you're ever going to do. Well, come on. We spend countless hours studying this, and there were a lot of different ways to do this even better.
I can't imagine how difficult it would be to negotiate your own contract. But one thing guys have done, and I would like your opinion on a guy coming out. Let's say a guy's a rookie. He's going to be a rookie. He's about to be drafted. A guy like Baker Mayfield. For him hiring an agent, what kind of benefit does that give him when he knows, especially now that the first round, everything is slotted basically on their pay? It's not back in the day when Sam Bradford's getting $50 million guaranteed and guys hold out. Like you're known, you're signed early now. What is the benefit of having an agent for your first contract instead of what some guys have done when you basically hire a lawyer to negotiate your contract when that time comes?
Yeah, I think we're seeing it right now. Lamar Jackson doesn't have an agent, or he's got his mother involved. Okay. And Lamar's making very curious decisions in this process, and has been accused of hard to get. An agent ultimately is an advocate for a player. We're an extension of the player. So as you know, when you went through your time, AJ, you were hot. There were a lot of teams that wanted to meet with you and visit with you, and so they would talk to me first. I kind of helped organize your calendar, and every time we talked to a team, we were able to get a nugget about what they thought about you. We were able to get a feel for where they thought you were going to be in the draft process. We were able to handle your calendar, which in your case was extremely busy, if you remember. I'm sure you do.
Yeah, being in school, that's the problem. I was still in school. Yeah, that was very tough.
Yeah, you were in school, and I'm sure you remember, we had certain dates you couldn't travel. And so we had to work through that. And then there were times where teams wanted to come and work you out. Well, everybody's got to remember, this is a job interview. Every time a player meets with a team, it's a job interview. He's got to be at his best. So in using your example, Baker Mayfield, let's say, he has 2 days where he's working out in a row, or even 3 days. He might be just physically exhausted by that third day. I have Kyle Lauletta. He's the Richmond quarterback. I've talked to Kyle a lot about this. Kyle, I'm not necessarily worried you throwing 3 days in a row, but I really want you to be at your very best. So if I can schedule these workouts where there's a day off in between, that's what's going to be best for you. Here's the thing. You can't tell a team, you can't tell a coach, hey, AJ Hawk, Baker Mayfield, Kyle Lauletta is not working out on Wednesday. They're the coach. They're going to make sure they get what they want. And where I can do that, I can make sure I, massage your schedule in the right way. And then just again, being your advocate as an agent, or, having the player have an advocate, someone that's constantly talking to teams, gathering the right information, finding out if there are any concerns. Every player that's gone to the combine has had complete physicals, and And in late March, early April, those teams are really more early April are going to have their meetings on what those physicals show. Players aren't going to find that out. Competent agents who have relationships can find out if there are any concerns and can start to, address those. There could be other concerns. I can remember a player, a team was concerned about him having asthma. Well, when you go back and research what happened in college with his program, 90 players were the teams that had asthma. So we were able to downplay the NFL team's concerns with this player having asthma. There's just a myriad of issues, that teams may have with a player. And as the advocate, that's our job to address those. And, when a team investigates and evaluates a player, they want to know everything possible from a negative standpoint, so that if they draft that player and that player walks in the building, there are no surprises. So they research, players inside and out. And it's funny, every year there are players that go to the combine, and the first thing we say is you got to be completely honest, because they're going to ask you questions that are leading and they already know the answers. So if you lie, you're going to be exposed. You have to be honest. Let's talk about some of these issues, and it will help prepare the player, to answer it maybe the right way. But players go to the combine and lie all the time. They present themselves in the wrong light, so I go on, but it's really just having an advocate in this process.
Yeah, you sold me. I mean, you bring up a good point with how your schedule, and you would feel weird as a 21-year-old kid. Nah, I'm not working out. I threw yesterday for the Dolphins. I'm not throwing for you tomorrow. You can come Friday. Like, that'd be weird as a player to have to be that guy. But you're right, though. I think when you're talking about meeting at the combine with teams, don't you think these coaches, and I've been in those meetings, and I've talked to coaches afterwards throughout my time in the league, and a lot of coaches I have good relationships with, all they care about, like you said, they know the answers. They just want the guy to be honest, but they don't want a kid to be playing a character. And I feel sometimes now when you go work out with these pre-draft gurus and they sit down and have these chalkboard sessions, fine, it's fine, whatever. Just let them know be prepared a little bit of what you may have to do. But they want to get to know you. So be honest, whatever it is. If you got hammered and jumped off a balcony and broke your ankle your junior year, they know that already. Don't try to make something else up and try to be funny. I don't know, just let your personality show. Isn't that what these guys want?
Yeah, I think teams, coaches in particular, want two things from every player. They want a guy that loves the game of football, and they want a guy that's talented. They're going to see the talent on tape. They're going to verify some of the aspects of talent at the combine, personal workouts and that thing. But they want a guy that's fully committed to being the best they can be. As you know, coaches, they get in at 5, 6 in the morning. They don't leave till 11, 12 at night. They spend so much time. So they want a guy that is all in on being the best he can be. Well, who's going to be all in on being the best he can be? A guy who loves the game of football. And that's really the difference. There's, guys do love playing on Sundays, but there are many, many players that don't love Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday through Saturday in the preparation. I'm sure you could address this better than me. There are guys who are simply paying for a paycheck, or paying for that, or playing for that limelight of Sunday. But the guys who love the game of football and are willing to do whatever it takes to be the best they can be, that's what a team wants, and that's what they're trying to figure out in these interviews. So when I talk to my players, I never give them the answers, because teams will see through it. But we talk through, okay, you have to learn how to express, in words, how much you love the game of football. And there's different ways you can do that. But it's got to be from your heart. It's got to be your words. And when it comes from your heart in the right way, you're going to have an impressive interview. So that's what we try to do with them.
Yeah, some guys love what football brings them, but they don't truly love football.
Exactly. So, and look, I make it really clear when I recruit players, you got to love football. I love it. I have 3 TVs at home, 3 big screens. I'm watching all day Saturday, all day Sunday. I truly have a passion for this game, and I want to represent players who have a similar passion. If you don't love it, that's okay. I'm just not the right agent for you. So when I do sign my 3, 4, 5 players every year, it's great, because I know that they love the game. You love the game of football, AJ. I mean, it was something that you had an incredible passion for. And because of it, and because of who you are and your character, it was easy to represent you. We were always kind of in lockstep. We didn't have to talk about things probably other agents and players have to talk about, because you just had a love for the game that superseded anything.
Yeah, of course. And you got to, when you needed something, you could text my wife Laura and let her know that, hey, what's AJ think about this or that? And the best thing, I guess, the greatest compliment I think that for you that I would give you is like whenever I ever needed anything, which I don't think was real often, you 100% were on board and would do whatever. And I wasn't a guy that I wasn't going to reach out to you every day. Oh, I had a rough practice today. Like that's dumb. Like I don't think you want a client like that. But whenever I needed anything done or said or something confronted with a team, bam, you were on it instantly. So I think that's the greatest compliment an agent can have. Like you were there when I needed something, and for all your contract, everything in the contract, we were definitely well meshed, I guess, on what our thoughts and beliefs were on what we wanted.
Well, I do remember when we signed your rookie contract, and it was a grind. The one real good thing came out of it is you had to miss that 3-hour first team meeting.
Yeah.
With all the rules and everything. But I remember when we signed, I said, hey, AJ, now really what I love about this is the football part. So, keep me updated. Don't just disappear until the next contract. Because, as much as the contract and the business side, I do enjoy, what I really love about being an agent is watching my guys play and just, I didn't miss a play in your career. If and most guys, I try and watch everything they do so that I have a full understanding when I'm going to negotiate. I have a full understanding if something were to arise from a, playing time standpoint or whatever it might be. So, I really love watching the game and following my guys and just understanding their strengths and weaknesses so I can advocate for them.
Yeah, I want to get back to Kirk Cousins for a little bit, just to think about how he got to Minnesota. So I wonder how early on you knew that Minnesota was the front runner, because I have weird inside sources that back in the day, a while ago, were telling me like, yeah, Minnesota is going to do whatever it takes to get Kirk. Did you get a feeling of that?
Not really. So what we did in our office, my partner Kyle Dolan and I spent the fall preparing for the possibility of Kirk being a free agent. And earlier in an interview, I said we had 7 teams. We actually had 8 teams. The reason we picked 8 teams is we had 8 tabs in our notebook. You know how the tabs go down.
Wait, you mean you picked 8 teams, or 8 teams were showing interest that they could possibly sign him?
No, this was during the season. So we picked 8 teams. So we looked at the rosters, the quarterback depth charts of everybody, and we tried to anticipate, what would happen. And I would talk to teams during the year. Teams can't talk about Kirk Cousins per se, but I could talk to the teams and plant seeds and say, hey, just so you know, if Kirk hits the market, you're a team that could be really, attractive to us. I could say things like that to teams. So Minnesota was certainly one of the teams, but going into the season, they had 3 guys, and they had Sam Bradford, that first game of the year, he was unbelievable. Teddy Bridgewater, knowing he was coming off that tough injury, and then Case Keenum, obviously comes off the bench and plays great for him. So during the season, I'm not sure we had a strong feel that Minnesota would be one of them. And ultimately, it came down to about 4 teams. And so as I kind of went through the combine process and the process before that negotiation window started, I had a pretty good, confidence level that 4 teams would be in it. And, then it was like, okay, Kirk, we got to make sure, that we do our homework ahead of time, because we can't really hold up the entire marketplace. It's not fair to everybody else, especially at that position. We saw Ndamukong Suh go take a lot of visits and take his time. I'm not sure that would have worked well with Kirk. So Kirk and I said, hey, let's just do our homework ahead of time. Let's really talk through every scenario, every team, the strengths and weaknesses. In this book that we prepared for him, we looked at statistically what teams had done. We looked at kind of their roster building, how they acquired players, what they did in the draft. We looked at their relationships, whether, the general manager, the head coach, the coordinator, how long they had been there. We looked at a lot of things like that. from a pure football standpoint. And then we looked at things off the field from taxes in each area, all those kind of things. So we wanted to be as prepared ahead of time as possible. The missing piece in all that, though, is you don't know what a team's going to offer. So you may go into Monday with a soft pecking order, but until teams make their offers, you really don't know. And, I had put it out there, kind of back channeled, I guess, that we were looking for a 3-year fully guaranteed at signing offer. And so I think teams knew, and what was really interesting about this whole negotiation is the media was doing it every day. It was crazy. Yeah. I've never represented a player that where the media was so involved, or thought they were so involved. So things were, being publicized that just weren't true. But everybody was talking about this contract. And so as we got to Monday, we felt like we had Arizona, Denver, Minnesota, and the Jets. And, I didn't use this term, but I essentially said, hey, we're going to have a silent auction and bring your best. Don't hold back in any way, because we don't want to be unfair to the teams that finish second, third, and fourth. And, I think that a couple of the teams very much honored, and gave us their very best offer, right from the start. And so it allowed Kirk and I to have good conversations to finish our evaluation that Monday. And then, that's when we really knew that it was Minnesota. But coming into the couple days, or maybe coming out of the combine, that's how we got to those 4 teams. Just, how the combine works. There's a lot of chatter. You talk to teams, you plant seeds, you just read people, and you can get a feel for who's going to be interested in your player.
Yeah. So in that silent auction, does that mean that Minnesota was the highest bidder?
No, not really. And for Kirk, it wasn't going to be about every last dollar. He definitely wanted to go to a place where he could win. I had probably, 20, 30-minute conversations with all 4 teams early on Monday, and they were all 4 impressive. Every team had something real positive to offer. I was real impressed with Arizona, Steve Keim and Mike Disner. Steve's the general manager, Mike's the cap guy. A couple teams had their owners call throughout the day. You could tell that they wanted Kirk, and they were trying to make a case on why their roster was good enough to win, or why they maybe had the best offensive coordinator. Some teams were maybe taking some shots at other teams, which was really interesting. Ultimately with Minnesota, I think Kirk, grew up in the Midwest. Minnesota is a great, town other than the cold weather probably. They're 2 games from a Super Bowl, or they're 1 game from a Super Bowl this year. They've got a big-time defense. They've got weapons at the receiver position. John DeFilippo, the new offensive coordinator, had a real energy about him and excitement. I talked to him briefly on that Monday. So we just felt like Minnesota had maybe the total package when it was all said and done. But again, until we get to Monday, we don't know what they're going to offer. They could have offered, say, 24, 25 million a year, and that just wouldn't have done it. We were looking for a certain threshold, and that's why when Denver decided not to make an offer, I understood. Hey, they thought that ultimately if this was going to be solely about football, he probably would choose Minnesota. If this was going to be solely about money, maybe he would go in a different direction. And so they just said, let's just secure, the guy we want if we can't get Kirk, but who knew? We did not know what any team was going to offer until that Monday.
So did Denver not make an offer, or did they hear the numbers coming out and then decide to not make an offer?
Denver didn't make an offer, and I had really good conversations with him. John Elway was great. What's really interesting, not Minnesota, but the other 3 teams, I had quarterbacks there last year. So I had a really good feel for their, organization and how they did things. And Trevor Siemian was one of my guys in Denver. So I knew what had happened in Denver. And Elway was great about explaining that they're about winning Super Bowls. And last year was not 100% on one position, but the whole team had to take accountability for their 1-loss record. And so when we went through it though, and I got to tell them exactly what I was looking for, I think that's when they said, when they hung up and they kind of gathered in their own facility, like, hey, I don't know if we're going to get this guy. Let's make sure we go and get a guy that we're real excited about.
Yeah, it's Case Keenum.
Yeah, and which, then Case leaves Minnesota, and so you would think that Minnesota, sitting from our vantage point, if they couldn't get Kirk, they wanted to get Case. And so now we've told Minnesota that they're going to get the first visit as of Monday night. We told Arizona the same thing Monday night, and then I told the Jets Tuesday morning. So at that point, could have really stuck it to Minnesota and turned the screws on them. But, that's not. Kirk and I and his father in particular had talked about this a lot. There was a threshold we wanted to get, and if we got the structure, the 3-year fully guaranteed at signing, it's not really about every last penny at that point. I mean, $28 million a year is a phenomenal contract, and so now let's not actually ask for more money and stick it to the team. Let's make sure they can go put the finishing touches on the roster to make sure you win. Because then the next contract, if you can win a Super Bowl or two, now we're looking at even a better contract.
Yeah, it's a 3-year deal. How old will he be at the end of this contract?
He'll be 32 years old.
So he's really the last, from what I can remember, the last quarterback to be in his prime to be an unrestricted free agent. Is there anybody else?
Well, Drew Brees was unrestricted when he left San Diego, but he had the shoulder injury. Mm-hmm. And we all know that he went to Miami when Nick Saban was there, and the Miami Dolphins failed him on the physical. And that's when he ended up in New Orleans. I want to say he signed a 5 or 6 year deal in New Orleans at that point. But as far as a starting quarterback, sub 30 years of age, yeah, Kirk's the only one. And now, in his prime, he'll end up being a free agent again, potentially at the age of 32.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing. He not only this deal, but we got plenty more time. 32 is not old at all for a quarterback, so it sets up great in the future if he is successful. So then, but how does this, because this is guaranteed, how does this change now that we're talking about Aaron Rodgers is going to get an extension here at some point? All these other quarterbacks moving forward, does this change what they can ask for now?
I hope so. Yeah, that's our hope, is that this is a game changer. Matt Ryan and Aaron Rodgers are the next two guys. Matt's got 1 year left on his contract. Aaron's got 2. The advantage Kirk has that those guys don't have is if any of the 3 were to get franchised, Matt would have to get only at 20. Only is not maybe only is at 20%. Aaron would be at 20%. Kirk would be at 44% and can only get 1 franchise tag. Those other 2 guys can get 2. So what Atlanta is doing right now is they're saying internally, hey, we've got Matt. I'm not sure the exact number. Let's just say it's 20 million. We've got him at 20 million and this year, and we got 2 franchise tags. So at some level, it's 3 years, 85 million the next 3 years. And that's going to frame the negotiation from their standpoint, just like 2 years at 44 framed our negotiation, coming off the 2015 season. I think it's a little tougher on the Packers because they've got Aaron for 2 years right now, who's 34 years old. So if they do an extension of, 2-3 years and turn it into a 5-year deal, now he's going to 39. At some point, teams do start to worry that there's going to be some loss of performance or guys become susceptible to injury as they hit their late 30s.
Why? So I know that's the talk that Aaron's like the next guy up, he and Matt Ryan. If he has 2 years left on his deal, why is he the next man up? Why would they negotiate now?
It's only going to get more expensive. I think teams are realizing when the cap goes up $10 million a year, that's, in Aaron's case, first of all, he's coming off a season where he was injured. I think the Packers, if I'm them, probably want to capitalize on that a little bit.
But to cut you off, sorry, doesn't it look like he is more valuable than ever? The fact that he goes down and the team can't win.
Certainly, but now play it out to 2018 season. If he comes back, he has another great year. They go deep in the playoffs. Now his leverage is even higher.
Yeah.
So, the leverage for the team is he's got 2 years under contract. If they throw enough dollars at him that are guaranteed, will he just say, you know what, let me just secure my, that financially for the next few years? That'll be an interesting negotiation to watch, as will Atlanta. Our hope is that more and more players will get fully guaranteed deals. I also think it'd be great if players get shorter deals and, aren't so susceptible to getting released in the latter part of their contract.
Why is the fact that shorter deals, I agree with 100%, but do the teams just give you these 4 or 5 year deals so they can spread the cap number out? Why does it happen this way?
It's just the way it's been traditionally done. So Ryan Jensen's a center I have. He's been in Baltimore the last 5 years, basically a 1-year starter. I had many teams interested in Ryan, and ultimately we did a 4-year deal with Tampa Bay. Fortunately, he's the highest paid center in football now. But, Tampa, as well as many other teams, initially made 5-year offers. And it's hard to get just 3 years on a contract. And so we felt really good that we got 4 years only on the contract, so that I think Ryan is 26 or 27 years old. He'll get another bite at the apple, as we say. In that case, Tampa was willing to guarantee the first 2 years. So now for years 3 and 4, Tampa can release him at any moment and it won't cost them anything. So that's where the player becomes vulnerable. And, as much as we can shorten the deal, had we done a 5-year deal, that would have given them essentially 3 one-year team options. That's a lot of vulnerability from a time standpoint. So we do feel better about the 4-year deal. But that's the goal, is to get shorter deals for the better players, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think that we all know with these 5, sometimes 6-year deals aren't real contracts. That's why people think you watch basketball, you watch hockey, baseball, they have guaranteed contracts. Like my brother-in-law plays hockey, and he was trying to explain their contracts to me, and it's mind. I don't even understand. Some guys sign a 7-year, $50 million contract, and you can't be cut. You can be bought out and get paid 75% of your salary, and then you can double dip and play for another team.
Yeah, and you rarely see the double dipping, by NFL players because of offset language. So, the shorter deal is better in the long run for a player, as long as enough money in the early part of the contract is guaranteed. As you get older, and a team is willing to pay you the right amount, that's one thing. What we've done traditionally as agents, though, if we did a 5-year or 6-year deal, we understand, the player understands that he's vulnerable and he may be released at some point. When he is released is such a critical thing. Richard Sherman's case, he was released before the start of free agency, which empowered him to go get a fair market deal. And Ndamukong Suh was released during the start of free agency. It empowered him to go get a full market deal. There are other guys that are getting released now. Go back to San Francisco. One of the things they like to do is their guarantees don't kick in until April 1st. That's tomorrow. Or in this case, let's just say it's a business day of Monday. So they can literally cut players today. Well, free agency is essentially over, and so when a player is released is a huge component in this. And so one of the ways we get around it is shorter deal. Another way is we do roster bonuses that force the team to make a decision. In other words, if the player is on the roster the third day of the league year, as an example, then he gets X amount of dollars, 500,000, $1 million, whatever it might be. And then now as a player, hey, I'm going to probably be on the team that year. If you're not, at least you've got that roster bonus in your pocket. So
yeah, and it forces them to, if they want to release you, you'll be released in time to where every team hasn't used up all their cap space and there's not flooded with free agent market. Like, it's true. If you get released now after free agency, the teams already have kind of put their teams together and they're all in on the draft now. They're not really worried about free agents.
Yeah, it doesn't mean you won't get offers, but you're not going to get the same offers you would have gotten 2 weeks ago, for sure. Yeah, there's no doubt that free agency lasts about 10 to 14 days. And then this past week, we saw the owners' meetings, and that's when teams sort of take a deep breath They don't really sign many players, and when they come back from the owners' meeting starting tomorrow, or excuse me, Monday, then they're going to be on to the draft. And, they'll dabble here and there in free agency. 3 weeks ago, it was all in on free agency. So as an agent, you want your players available when they're all in.
Okay. Well, final question for me. I wonder what happened with the A.J. McCarron situation. So he becomes a free agent from Cincinnati. He was spoken pretty highly, and I was with A.J. for a year in Cincinnati. I've seen he can play. And then all of a sudden it was like there wasn't the interest that we thought going into free agency for A.J. McCarron.
Yeah, that was really interesting. So, I have a little understanding because after Kirk Cousins and Case Keenum were sort of spoken for, it became a mad scramble in the league. So free agency started, at least the negotiation window, on Monday. Tuesday morning, there was a ESPN or NFL Network report that Kirk Cousins had agreed with the Minnesota Vikings. We had not agreed to a contract, but we had agreed to visit them. Well, from that moment on, I want to say that was about 10 o'clock Central Time. For about the next 6 hours was unreal, because I have Josh McCown and Drew Stanton, so I'm talking to all these teams, and I could tell there was just literally a mad scramble to get the remaining starters, whether they were considered short-term or bridge starters, under contract. And ultimately there were more teams than chairs, or than quarterbacks. So, Josh ended up agreeing with the Jets later that day. Bradford ended up agreeing with Arizona, and Buffalo was a team we were talking to. I think they were in on both McCown and Bradford. And when they didn't get those two, they sort of had to ultimately look like they settled for AJ, and AJ got a lot less money than those other two guys got. Going into the process, like I was reading where he was, people were excited, that they didn't expect him to be a free agent. He became one. But looking back, he certainly was kind of on the outside looking in from that starter standpoint. And yet it worked out well for A.J. McCarron. He's with a playoff team in Buffalo. Certainly they're going to try and draft a young guy, but he's got his chance to be a starter now. So, hopefully for A.J. he can play well and have a chance to hit it big at the next time he hits the market.
I think didn't he sign a 1-year deal?
It was a 2-year deal, I want to say, and it was maybe $4 million a year, something like that.
Yeah, if he can be their starting quarterback, that is the greatest discount ever for the Buffalo Bills, and then AJ can play well, hit the market, and sign a $100 million contract.
And that's what Case Keenum did. Case was a backup a year ago, signed a 1-year, $2 million deal in Minnesota, and took off, came off the bench for a playoff team and played lights out and parlayed that into not quite $100 million, but still a real deal for 2 years.
Yeah, with a good team and a team that should be good in Denver, the Denver Broncos. So, yeah, it works out. If you can play, it'll work out for you, especially at the quarterback position. But, Mike, thanks, man. Appreciate you coming on here. Priority Sports, you guys are doing good things down there in Chicago.
Always great talking to you, man.
Sorry, up there, Mike, from Ohio. I just
got
back.
Hey, great talking to you, buddy.
Thanks. See you, Mike.
All right, bye.
We're glad you could join us for today's conversation. After you subscribe to the show, head over to thehawkcast.com or reach out to AJ directly on Twitter at @officialAJHawk to recommend future guests that will help us inspire people to keep talking. Thanks again, and we look forward to speaking with you next time on the HawkCast.